You woke up this morning, and within minutes, before you said a single word to another human being, the world had already started shaping your mind for you. The notification, the low-grade anxiety, the mental replay of everything unfinished, the noise that finds you before you even find yourself. And here is what most people never stop to ask. What if the first hour of your day is not a neutral period, not simply the time before your real life begins, but the most decisive hour you will ever have? What if everything you become, every version of yourself you either build or erode, is determined not by what happens to you, but by what you do in the window before the world gets access to your attention? The Stoics understood this not as a wellness concept, not as a productivity hack, as a matter of survival. That Marcus Aurelius did not wake up as an emperor. He woke up as a man who knew that power without philosophy is just waiting to collapse. Epictetus did not wake up free. He woke up as a former slave who had discovered something slavery could not take from him. And every morning, before the demands of the world arrived, both of them did something the majority of people around them never did. They prepared. What you are about to learn is not a morning routine in the way that phrase is usually sold to you. This is not about cold showers and green juice and 5 a.m. alarm clocks as performance. This is about something older and far more serious. 7 practices the Stoics built their mornings around. Practices that did not make their lives easier, but made them unbreakable. By the time this is finished, you will not look at your mornings the same way again. And more than that, you will understand something about yourself that the noise of daily life has been successfully drowning out for a very long time. So sit down, lock in, because what follows is not self-help dressed in ancient clothing. It is a philosophy that has been battle-tested against slavery, empire, exile, grief, and death. And it begins before you leave your bed. Before we get to the 7 practices, you need to understand what is actually happening to you every morning, because until you see it clearly, no routine will protect you from it. Here is the truth most people refuse to accept. You are not starting your day. Your day is starting you. The moment your phone screen lights up, the moment you open your news feed, the moment you begin rehearsing the social interactions you are anxious about. In that moment, you have handed the authorship of your mind to forces that have no interest in your clarity, your virtue, or your depth. They are interested in your attention, and they will take it before you have decided to give it. The Stoics called this the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the command center of your inner life, the part of you that decides what matters, how to respond, what kind of person you are becoming. And their central argument was this: if you do not rule your own hegemonikon in the first moments of the day, something else will. It always does. This is not a philosophical abstraction. This is what is happening to you right now. When every morning you wake up and immediately become reactive, a receiver instead of an originator, you are ceding the most important territory there is, yourself. This is the villain of this video, not your circumstances, not the people demanding things from you, not even the phone. The villain is the unexamined morning, the hours you hand over without ever deciding to hand them over. Centuries of Stoic philosophy converge on one observation. The man who cannot govern his first waking hour cannot govern anything else with any real depth. And the man who can changes. So here are the 7 things, not suggestions, practices. There is a difference that most people will never understand. 1. Wake with intention, not reaction. The first thing a Stoic does upon waking is not reach for information. It is reach for orientation. And before one word of news, before one notification, before one spoken demand, there is a question to be asked, and it must be asked in silence. What kind of person am I choosing to be today? Marcus Aurelius opened each day by reminding himself of what he was walking into, not with dread, with preparation. He wrote that at dawn he would meet with busybodies, ingrates, the deceitful, the envious, and the cruel, and then, remarkably, he wrote that none of them could harm him, not because he was naive about human nature, because he had already decided, before encountering any of it, what he would be in the middle of it. That is the practice, not affirmation, not optimism, deliberate pre-commitment to a way of being before the world presents you with reasons to abandon it. Oh, most people wake up and immediately begin reacting to information. News feeds, messages, the ambient anxiety of a world that never stops broadcasting urgency. And this reaction, repeated every single day without examination, is not neutral. It is training. It is drilling the reflex of passivity into the structure of your mind. The Stoic understood that what you rehearse in the morning is what you become under pressure, and what most people are rehearsing right now, before they leave their beds, is helplessness in the face of everything external. The practice is simple and costs nothing. Before you reach for your phone, before you speak, before you plan, ask the question, who am I choosing to be today? Let the answer be specific, not good, not productive, specific, patient with the person who frustrates you. Be honest in the conversation you have been avoiding, present in the work that deserves your full depth. Decide it before the world arrives. Then the world cannot decide it for you. 2. Read something that argues with you. The second practice will disturb you if you do it correctly. Every morning the Stoics read, not to be entertained, not to feel inspired, to be challenged. Epictetus assigned his students texts precisely because philosophy that costs you nothing changes nothing in you. The Stoics treated reading the way a soldier treats training, not as a pleasant activity, but as preparation for the encounter with reality that is coming, whether you prepare for it or not. But here is the part most people miss when they talk about Stoic reading habits. They were not reading to confirm what they already believed. They were reading to find the place where their thinking was weak. This is uncomfortable. Most people curate their information environments so that every source they encounter reflects their existing framework back at them at a slightly higher volume. They mistake the feeling of being validated for the experience of being educated. And over time, without ever intending it, they become intellectually fragile. They have all the vocabulary of their worldview, and none of the resilience that comes from having had that worldview genuinely tested. The Stoic practice is different. Read something in the morning that makes a serious argument you find difficult to immediately dismiss. Not something offensive for its own sake. Something rigorous. Something that forces you to locate the actual foundations of what you think you know. And then ask, honestly, whether those foundations hold. You will resist this. Your ego will suggest that you already understand the opposing position, and therefore do not need to sit with it. That resistance is precisely the signal that the reading is necessary. The Stoics knew that the examined life is not primarily pleasant. It is primarily honest, and honesty begins in the morning before the day gives you reasons to perform certainty you do not actually possess. 3. Speak the worst out loud. Here is the one that separates philosophy from decoration. The Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, the deliberate and systematic contemplation of what could go wrong, what could be lost, what could fail, end, be taken, or collapse. And they did not do this to manufacture suffering. They did it to destroy the illusion that protection from suffering is possible, because that illusion is far more dangerous than the suffering itself. Seneca wrote that nothing happens to the wise man contrary to his expectation, not because wise men predict the future, because they have already traveled to the worst version of it in their minds and returned with something ordinary people do not possess. Equanimity that does not depend on outcomes. The morning practice is this: before you begin your day, name the 3 things you are most afraid of losing. Say them plainly, not to catastrophize, to acknowledge the relationship, the income, the health, the reputation, the thing that, if you lost it today, would feel like the ground disappearing beneath you. Name it. Sit with the reality of its impermanence. Once and then, this is the essential part. Ask what remains if it is gone. Most people cannot do this. They live in a permanent and exhausting negotiation with the future, trying to secure outcomes they know are not fully within their control. The Stoic does not negotiate with impermanence. The Stoic accepts it every single morning as the basic condition of existence, and therefore spends the day free from the particular terror that haunts people who have never looked directly at what they are afraid to lose. This is not pessimism. It is the most radical form of freedom available to a human being. When you have already imagined the loss clearly and found that you can survive it, that you would still be you on the other side of it. The thing that was controlling you through fear loses its power every morning, before the day asks you to prove it. 4. Move the body to reclaim the mind. Stop here, because this is the practice where the Stoics diverge most sharply from the way this kind of content usually presents them. There is a version of Stoicism that has been sold to the modern world as pure mentalism, as though the philosophy is entirely a project of the mind, indifferent to what the body does or suffers. That version is wrong, and it is costing people something important. The Stoics were not indifferent to the body. They were specific about it. Epictetus, who spent years in physical chains, understood that the body is the first domain in which you either practice discipline or abandon it. Marcus Aurelius noted that the hardness of the body produces a related hardness of character. And Seneca wrote extensively about the relationship between physical laziness and philosophical weakness, that a mind in a soft body tends towards soft thinking. The morning practice is not about aesthetics. It is not about fitness in the modern commercial sense. It is about something older and more serious. When you choose to do something difficult with your body before the day requires anything of you, when you move against comfort, against the preference for warmth and stillness, you are not simply exercising. You are practicing the fundamental Stoic act. You are demonstrating to yourself in the most concrete possible way that you are the kind of person who acts from decision rather than from comfort every single morning. And here is what makes this practice dangerous to ignore. The body keeps score in a way the mind will rationalize away. You can convince your mind that you are disciplined while living in physical passivity. The body cannot be deceived in the same way. It knows whether you acted or retreated. And over time, the pattern of retreat teaches you, at a level deeper than thought, that retreat is who you are. Move your body first, before the day has any claim on you, not for how you look, for who you are deciding to become. 5. Write down what you are not controlling. This is where most people think they understand Stoicism, and where most people are fundamentally wrong about it. The dichotomy of control. the idea that some things are up to us and some things are not. Epictetus placed this distinction at the absolute foundation of his entire philosophy. In our power, he wrote, our opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, not in our power, body, reputation, political office, the opinions of others. And the central claim of his philosophy was that suffering is not caused by bad events. Suffering is caused by believing that bad events involve the things that are actually in your power. Here is why most people get this wrong. They reduce it to a feeling. They tell themselves, I can't control this as a verbal gesture, and then spend the next several hours emotionally dominated by the exact thing they just declared outside their control. The verbal acknowledgement changes nothing in them. They have the language of Stoic philosophy without the practice of it. The morning practice is not verbal. It is written. Take a piece of paper, not a phone, not an app, paper, and write down everything that is worrying you today. Everything. Out of the meeting, the person, the financial uncertainty, the health concern, the thing someone said that you are still rehearsing in the back of your mind. Write it all down. Then, next to each item, write one of two words, mine or not mine. The ones labeled not mine, you cross out, not because they stop existing, because you are formally, explicitly, in writing, releasing your claim to control over them. You are practicing the withdrawal of your attention from the things that will consume it anyway if you let them, and the ones labeled mine, you look at carefully, because these are the only places your energy belongs. Your response, your preparation, your honesty, your effort. The rest is weather, and you do not argue with weather. This practice will take you 6 minutes. What it produces, when done daily with genuine seriousness, rather than as a ritual you perform without inhabiting, is a quality of attention that most people spend their entire lives wanting and never developing. The capacity to be present to what is actually yours. 6. Practice one act of voluntary difficulty. And here is what most morning routine content will never tell you, because it is uncomfortable, and it does not sell well, and it asks something of you that the entire structure of modern life is designed to make unnecessary. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship, deliberately, systematically. Seneca would periodically live for days on the simplest food, wearing rough clothing, sleeping without comfort. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to know whether he could. And he wanted to look at the soft life and say, I have tested myself against its absence. I am not its prisoner. This is not asceticism as religious performance. This is strategic self-inoculation against the most reliable source of human weakness, comfort, the addiction to convenience, the gradual shrinking of your tolerance for difficulty until the smallest friction derails you. Every morning do one thing you do not want to do. Something small is sufficient. The cold water at the end of the shower, the conversation you have been avoiding, the writing you have been circling for 3 weeks, the apology, the early start on the work that frightens you. It does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be voluntary, and it needs to be chosen, not by the version of you that is comfortable and avoiding, but by the version of you that you are trying to become. Here is what the Stoics discovered that you will discover too if you commit to this practice. Voluntary difficulty is not diminishing. It is expanding. Every morning you choose the hard thing. You enlarge the category of what you can face. And this enlargement is cumulative. It compounds in exactly the way that avoidance compounds, except in the opposite direction. The person who practices voluntary difficulty every morning for 1 year is not the same person who started. They are someone the original person would not have been able to predict, someone the world cannot easily push off course. because the world's primary lever over most people is the promise of comfort and the threat of its removal. Take that lever away, voluntarily, deliberately, every morning before the world even asks, and you have done something that most philosophical traditions across all of human history agree is among the most significant things a person can do. The Stoics called it ascesis, practice, not belief, not intention, practice. 7. End the morning in silence. This is the one that will be hardest to take seriously, and it is the most important of all 7. Before you walk out the door, before you speak to anyone, before the day begins in earnest. Sit in deliberate, undistracted, unproductive silence. Not meditation in the branded modern sense. Not an app with a timer. Silence. For long enough to notice what is actually happening inside you, underneath the noise you have been trained to generate and consume as a substitute for thought. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations for no audience. They were not published. They were not shared. They were the private record of a man at the height of worldly power, choosing every day to go inward rather than perform, to actually encounter himself rather than the version of himself that the empire needed to see. He knew something that the busy, the distracted, and the performatively productive do not know. That clarity is not found in acceleration. It is found in the still moment before acceleration begins. Here is the deeper truth beneath this practice. Everything else in this framework, the intention, the difficult reading, the premeditation of loss, the physical discipline, the written division of what is and is not yours, the voluntary hardship, all of it produces content. Questions, discomfort, realizations that are still unresolved. If you immediately rush that material into the noise of the day, it dissipates. The insight you almost had disappears beneath the demand for your attention that never stops. The silence is the container. It is the place where the 7 practices are allowed to settle into something usable. Without it, you have information about Stoicism. With it, you begin to have something older and more valuable than information. You begin to have a relationship with your own mind. And that relationship, built in silence before the world arrives every single morning, is the thing that makes a philosophy a life, rather than a collection of impressive ideas you once encountered. This is why silence frightens people, not because it is empty, because it is full, and full of the questions you have been avoiding with productivity and noise and the permanent motion of the modern life. The silence will surface them. It will ask you things you cannot answer with a quick search or a confident opinion. It will make the distance between who you claim to be and who you are in your unobserved moments unavoidably visible. The Stoics were not afraid of that distance. They measured it every morning, and then they spent the day attempting to close it. Here is the watch-through reward, the thing underneath the thing. These 7 practices are not a morning routine. They are a daily act of philosophical self-governance, and the reason most people will encounter this framework, agree with it, and then return to their phones within 30 seconds of closing this video, is not laziness. It is something more precise than laziness. It is the terror of authorship. When you practice waking with intention, you are claiming authorship of your mind. When you read what argues with you, you are claiming authorship of your beliefs. When you speak the worst out loud, you are claiming authorship of your relationship with loss. When you move against comfort, you are claiming authorship of your body. When you write what is and is not yours, you are claiming authorship of your attention. When you choose voluntary difficulty, you are claiming authorship of your character. When you sit in silence, You are claiming authorship of your interiority, and authorship is terrifying because it eliminates the excuse. The man who has genuinely practiced these things every morning cannot blame the world for who he is becoming. He has been too honest with himself about the mechanisms of that becoming, and most people, quietly, without ever admitting it, would rather be shaped by forces they did not choose than be responsible for a shape they consciously created and cannot attribute to anyone else. This is what Epictetus meant when he wrote that it is better to die hungry and free of grief and fear than to live in abundance and disturbed in mind. He was not romanticizing poverty. He was identifying the specific terror that comfort produces in people who have allowed comfort to become their governor. The terror that anything could be taken. The terror that without the external structure, there is no internal structure. The terror of the man who has never sat in silence long enough to discover whether he can bear his own company. The 7 practices are the antidote, not to difficulty, to the fear of difficulty, and the path through that fear is not a shortcut. It is the morning. You have absorbed the framework, but there is a question this video opened that it cannot close. The practices are clear. The philosophy is coherent. What is harder to address, and what requires its own full exploration, is the question of what happens when you practice these things faithfully, and the world still defeats you. When the morning discipline holds and the afternoon collapses anyway. When the philosophy is sound and the circumstances are cruel, and the gap between who you have trained yourself to be and what you are actually able to do in the middle of real loss, real failure, real humiliation, remains painfully visible. The Stoics did not pretend this gap closes completely. Marcus Aurelius wept. Seneca was exiled. Epictetus was tortured. The philosophy did not make them invulnerable. It made them coherent inside the wound. There is a difference, and that difference is what a separate exploration is required to do justice to, if that question is already forming in your mind. And for the right kind of person, it will be. That is the thread to pull on next. If something shifted while you were listening, if something in this landed in a place that a quicker, louder piece of content has never reached, then do one thing right now before you close this. Hit the like button, not as an obligation, because liking content that doesn't try to sell you certainty is how that kind of content survives in an ecosystem designed to reward the opposite. It costs you nothing. It tells me this kind of depth has a place here. I save this video, not to watch again immediately, to return to the next morning when the routine starts to decay, because it will, and you need the framework restated with precision. That is exactly what this video is for. If you are not already subscribed, consider what that means. This channel exists to take philosophy seriously, rather than ornamentally, to treat ideas as things to be lived, rather than quoted. If that is the standard you are holding your intellectual consumption to, then subscribing is simply the behavior that follows from what you already want. There is someone in your life right now who has the vocabulary of self-improvement, but is operating without the philosophical foundation underneath it. Someone building habits without understanding what habits are defending against. This video is specifically for that person. I'll share it with them, not as a recommendation, as something you actually believe they need. And in the comments below, write the practice from this list that you know, without any doubt, that you have been avoiding. Not the one that sounds hardest, the one that made something in you contract slightly when you encountered it in this video. That contraction is information. Write it, because the act of naming what you are avoiding is itself the first form of the practice. You have arrived at the end of this. But this is not an ending. This is the morning before the morning you are going to change. Everything in these 7 practices is available to you right now. None of it requires resources you do not have. None of it requires a better version of your circumstances. All of it requires only the decision, made again and again, every morning without exception, to be the author of your own mind before the world arrives to write something there for you. The Stoics did not promise you an easy life. They promised you something more serious than that. A life in which the difficulty is yours. The failure is yours. The growth is yours. The depth is yours. A life in which you cannot blame the noise because you chose the silence first. You cannot blame the comfort because you chose the difficulty first. You cannot blame the world for your reactions because you chose your responses first. That is not a morning routine. That is a philosophy of radical self-ownership, tested against empire and slavery and exile and death. Still standing, walk into tomorrow's morning differently, not perfectly, not with every practice in place, with one, just one, and then the next morning, two. And at some point, not dramatically, not with an announcement, you will notice that the person who woke up uncertain about whether they had any real governance over their own mind has been replaced by someone who asks better questions, tolerates more difficulty, and is genuinely less afraid of the truth than they used to be. That person is not a fantasy. That person is what these practices build. Now go build them